After 17 Christmas celebrations of excluding me, my daughter-in-law had the nerve to show up at my mansion. Wow, how fancy! I'm throwing a party. I stood up, adjusted my blazer, and said 3 words that made her blood run cold. I never thought I'd see the day when my own son would stand at my gates like a stranger, but there he was on that crisp December morning, looking uncomfortable in his expensive wool coat. 17 Christmases had passed since I'd last seen David's face, and now he stood behind my wrought iron gates like he was visiting a museum instead of his childhood home. But it wasn't David who made my blood run cold that morning. It was her. Samantha. She stepped out of their black Mercedes like she owned the world, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the morning light, designer handbag swinging from her manicured fingers. After 17 years of systematically erasing me from my son's life, she had the audacity to show up at my Beacon Hill mansion wearing that calculating smile I remembered all too well. I watched them from my bedroom window on the 3rd floor, my hands trembling slightly as I gripped the silk curtains. At 72, I'd learned to control most of my emotions, but seeing them together after all these years brought back a flood of memories I'd worked hard to bury. My short white hair was perfectly styled as always, thinning now, but still meticulously maintained by my stylist every Tuesday morning. My brown eyes, sharp despite the tears that threatened to fall, had seen too much pain in recent years. I'd maintained my appearance through everything. The loneliness, the rejection, the sleepless nights wondering where I'd gone wrong as a mother. The December wind whipped through the bare branches of the oak trees lining my circular driveway, the same trees where David had built tree houses as a boy, where Charles had pushed him on the tire swing every summer evening after work. Now those trees stood like silent witnesses to what our family had become, broken, scattered, hollow. Rosa, my housekeeper of 20 years, appeared in the doorway behind me. Her dark eyes held the same protective concern they'd shown every Christmas morning when she'd found me sitting alone at the dining room table, staring at the empty chairs where my family should have been. "Mrs. Whitmore, there are people at the gate. They're asking to see you. I know who they are, Rosa." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Open the gates." Rosa hesitated, her weathered hands clasping together. She'd witnessed my breakdown that first Christmas when David didn't call, had held me while I sobbed over the rejection letters I'd written and rewritten to grandchildren I'd never met. She knew exactly who was standing at those gates. "Are you sure, Senora? Maybe you should call Mr. Patterson first." Patterson was my attorney, a sharp man who'd helped me navigate Charles's death and the complexities of my business empire. "No, Rosa, it's time." I took my time getting ready, each movement deliberate and precise. I selected a navy blue blazer that had always been Charles's favorite, the one he'd said brought out my eyes when we'd first started dating 50 years ago. I paired it with the pearl necklace he'd given me for our 30th anniversary, each pearl a reminder of the love that had sustained me through everything until his death 5 years ago. If I was going to face the woman who'd stolen my son, I'd do it with every ounce of dignity I had left. My reflection in the antique mirror showed a woman who'd refused to surrender to age or circumstance. Yes, my hair was white and thin now, requiring careful styling to maintain any semblance of volume. Yes, the lines around my brown eyes spoke of years of worry and heartache, but my posture remained straight, my clothing impeccable, my makeup flawless. I'd built a real estate empire worth $50 million by never letting anyone see weakness, and I wouldn't start now. By the time I reached the front door, they were standing on my marble steps like they belonged there. David looked older, grayer around the temples, but still possessed the handsome features he'd inherited from his father. The sight of him made my chest tighten with a mother's love that 17 years of silence couldn't kill. He was 45 now, successful in his own right as a corporate lawyer, but standing next to his wife, he still looked like the uncertain little boy who'd once needed his mother's approval for everything. "Hello, Mother." His voice was formal, distant. The little boy who used to run into my arms every day after school was gone, replaced by this stranger who couldn't even meet my eyes. I noticed the way he stood slightly behind Samantha, as if seeking her permission even for this greeting. "David." I nodded, drinking in every detail of his face, memorizing features I'd only seen in newspaper photographs of his law firm's victories. Then I turned my gaze to her, Samantha. She beamed at me like we were old friends meeting for lunch, but I caught the calculating gleam in her green eyes. At 42, she'd maintained her figure and her beauty with the dedication of someone who understood that appearance was currency. Her designer coat probably cost more than most people made in a month. Her handbag was clearly Italian leather, and her jewelry sparkled with the kind of diamonds that spoke of serious money. "Margaret, you look." She paused, her eyes sweeping over me with the practiced assessment of someone evaluating competition. "Well, you look well." Her gaze then swept over my mansion's grand entrance, taking in the marble columns imported from Italy, the crystal chandelier visible through the doorway that had once belonged to a French chateau, the oil paintings lining the walls, original works by artists whose names appeared in museums. I could practically see the dollar signs dancing in her pupils as she calculated the value of everything in sight. "What brings you here after all these years?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Inside, my heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I wondered if they could hear it. Samantha stepped forward, her smile widening to show teeth that had clearly benefited from expensive dental work. "Well, we were just driving through the neighborhood, and David mentioned this beautiful home where he grew up. I said, 'Honey, we simply must stop by.' And when I saw this gorgeous place," she gestured dramatically at my home with movements that seemed rehearsed, theatrical. "Oh my goodness, it's absolutely stunning. So elegant, so spacious. It must be what, 8,000 square feet? 9,000, I replied curtly, watching as her excitement seemed to intensify with the larger number. "Even better. The architecture is just breathtaking. Is this original Victorian?" She craned her neck to admire the ornate moldings, the stained glass windows that cast colorful patterns across the marble foyer. "And that chandelier. It's absolutely magnificent." I remained silent, studying her performance. This wasn't casual admiration. This was a woman conducting an appraisal. "You know, Margaret," she continued, her voice taking on a conspiratorial tone, "I have to ask, would you ever consider hosting a Christmas party here? I'm planning this spectacular event for some very important business associates, and honestly, nothing in Boston compares to this magnificent estate. The grand ballroom alone would be perfect for entertaining." The sheer audacity of her request hit me like a physical blow. 17 years of missed birthdays, 17 years of grandchildren I'd never met, 17 years of Christmas mornings spent alone in this very house while my son celebrated with her family, and now she wanted to use my home like some rental venue for her business contacts? I thought of the last Christmas before the estrangement, when I'd spent weeks decorating this house, hoping David and his new wife would join Charles and me for dinner. I'd hired caterers, bought expensive gifts, even had the piano tuned so David could play carols like he used to as a child. They'd canceled at the last minute, something about Samantha feeling uncomfortable with my expectations. After that, the invitations stopped coming. First, I wasn't invited to their New Year's party because it was just a small gathering. Then I was excluded from David's birthday celebration because Samantha thought it would be less complicated without me there. Within 2 years, I'd been completely erased from their social calendar, painted as the difficult mother-in-law who was too demanding and set in her ways. David shifted uncomfortably beside her, his hands fidgeting with his car keys, but he didn't speak up. He never did when it came to his wife. I recognized that particular stance. It was the same way he'd stood as a teenager when he was caught between disappointing me and disappointing his friends. The difference was that back then, he'd eventually find the courage to make his own choice. Now, at 45, he seemed incapable of independent thought when Samantha was involved. "A Christmas party," I repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the cold air between us. "Yes. Nothing too elaborate, just maybe 60 or 70 guests. All very distinguished people, business leaders, politicians, cultural figures. The kind of event that would really showcase a property like this." Her eyes gleamed as she spoke, and I realized she wasn't just talking about one party. She was envisioning a business opportunity, a way to monetize my home and my social standing. I'd handle all the arrangements, of course. You wouldn't have to lift a finger. We'd have the finest caterers, maybe Daniel Boulud or someone of that caliber. The most beautiful decorations, fresh flowers from the best florists in the city, champagne, caviar, a string quartet. It would be absolutely magical. I felt something cold settle in my chest, a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. This woman had spent nearly 2 decades poisoning my son against me, ensuring I was never invited to family gatherings, making sure I remained the outsider looking in. And now she was standing on my doorstep, asking to use my home as a backdrop for her social climbing. I remembered the last real conversation I'd had with David, just weeks after his wedding, when he'd called to tell me I was too critical of his new wife and needed to respect his choices if I wanted to remain in his life. I'd asked him what specifically I'd done wrong, begged him to help me understand how to fix our relationship. His answer had been vague, filled with phrases that sounded suspiciously like Samantha's vocabulary. Boundaries, toxic behavior, emotional manipulation. I'd tried so hard to make peace with Samantha in those early days. I'd bitten my tongue when she made snide comments about my old-fashioned decorating style, suggesting that my antiques made the house feel like a funeral parlor. I'd smiled when she criticized my cooking at family dinners, telling David right in front of me that his mother's pot roast was a bit heavy and that she preferred lighter, more contemporary cuisine. I'd even offered to help plan their wedding, only to be told my ideas were not quite what they had in mind and that they'd prefer to work with a more modern wedding planner, but it was never enough. Nothing I did would ever be enough for a woman who saw me as competition for my son's loyalty, who viewed my close relationship with David as a threat to her control over him. The final straw had come during David's birthday party that first year of their marriage. I'd spent weeks planning a surprise celebration at my home, inviting all his old friends from law school, preparing his favorite meal of prime rib and chocolate cake. When they arrived and saw the decorations I'd put up, tasteful navy and silver banners with photographs from David's childhood, Samantha had laughed, actually laughed. The sound had echoed through my dining room like breaking glass. "Oh, how sweet," she'd said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's like a little old lady's tea party. David, honey, your mother still thinks you're 12 years old." David had said nothing. He'd chosen his silence that night, and every night since. I'd watched the color drain from his face, seen the embarrassment in his eyes, but he'd offered no defense of me, no correction of his wife's cruelty. He'd simply stood there while his friends shifted uncomfortably and the party I'd worked so hard to create crumbled around us. That was the last time I'd tried to organize anything for my son. Within 6 months, I'd stopped receiving invitations to anything at all. Now, as I looked at this woman who'd systematically erased me from my own son's life, something inside me shifted. The hurt was still there, sharp and deep as ever, but it was joined by something else, something stronger, more dangerous. I adjusted my blazer, smoothed down my thin white hair, and looked directly into Samantha's expectant green eyes. After 17 years of silence, 17 years of wondering what I'd done wrong, 17 years of accepting blame for a situation I'd never understood, the words came out crystal clear, each one precisely enunciated, carrying the weight of accumulated pain and newfound resolve. "You're too late." The color drained from Samantha's face so quickly I thought she might faint right there on my marble doorstep. Her confident smile vanished, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like panic. David's eyes widened in confusion, darting between his wife and his mother, clearly missing some crucial piece of information that Samantha understood all too well. I'm sorry?" she stammered, her polished composure cracking like cheap veneer. I smiled then, a smile that held no warmth whatsoever. No forgiveness, no grandmother's love. It was the smile I'd perfected in boardrooms when crushing competitors who'd underestimated the little old lady with the thinning white hair. "Oh, I think you understand perfectly, my dear." And in that moment, watching the fear creep into her eyes as David stood there looking more confused than ever, I realized that maybe, just maybe, it was time for Margaret Whitmore to stop being the victim in this story. The silence that followed my words stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Samantha's face had gone from confident pink to ashen gray in a matter of seconds, while David looked between us with the bewildered expression of a man who'd walked into the middle of a foreign conversation. Mother, what are you talking about? David finally asked, his voice carrying the first hint of concern I'd heard from him in years. Too late for what? I kept my brown eyes fixed on Samantha, watching as she struggled to regain her composure. Her manicured hands were trembling now, clutching her designer purse like a lifeline. After 20 years of reading people in business negotiations, I could practically smell her desperation. Perhaps we should discuss this inside, I said, stepping back from the doorway. It's rather cold out here, and I suspect this conversation will take some time. Samantha looked like she wanted to bolt back to their Mercedes, but David was already moving toward the entrance. He paused at the threshold, his eyes taking in the familiar surroundings with an expression I couldn't quite read. The marble foyer where he'd slid in his socks as a child, the grand staircase where he'd posed for prom pictures, the family portraits lining the walls, everything exactly as he'd left it 17 years ago, preserved like a shrine to the son who'd disappeared from my life. The house looks exactly the same, he murmured, almost to himself. I never saw the point in changing what worked, I replied, watching as his gaze lingered on a photograph of him graduating from Harvard Law. Charles and I flanked him in the picture, our faces glowing with pride. Samantha wasn't in that photo. They hadn't met yet. Sometimes I wondered if that was why she hated reminders of David's life before her. We moved into the sitting room, where Rosa had already prepared tea service on the antique silver tray. She'd worked for our family long enough to anticipate these moments, though I suspected she'd never imagined it would involve the return of my prodigal son and his wife. David settled uncomfortably on the burgundy velvet sofa, where he'd once curled up with chicken pox while I read him stories. Samantha perched on the edge of a Queen Anne chair, her back rigid, her eyes darting around the room like she was calculating escape routes. Now then, I said, settling into my usual chair and smoothing my skirt with deliberate calm. You wanted to discuss hosting a Christmas party here, Samantha. How interesting that you should ask now, of all times. I don't understand what you mean by too late, she said, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. If you're not interested in hosting a party, you could simply say so. I smiled, reaching for the manila folder I'd placed on the side table before they arrived. I'd been carrying it with me for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Apparently, that moment had finally come. Oh, but I think you do understand, dear. You see, I've been quite busy these past few months. When you reach my age and face certain realities, you begin to take care of unfinished business. I opened the folder slowly, savoring the way Samantha's eyes fixated on the documents inside. It's amazing what a good private investigator can uncover when given enough time and resources. David leaned forward, his lawyer instincts kicking in. Mother, what kind of investigation? The kind that reveals 17 years of lies, manipulation, and fraud. I pulled out the first document, a detailed financial report. Did you know, David, that your wife has been embezzling money from her own charity foundation? The one that supposedly helps underprivileged children access education? The color drained from David's face as he turned to look at his wife. Samantha, what is she talking about? Samantha's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She's lying, David. She's obviously having some kind of breakdown, making wild accusations because she's bitter about— Bitter? I interrupted, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. My dear, I haven't even gotten to the interesting parts yet. I pulled out another document. Here's a copy of the police report filed last month by Mrs. Eleanor Harrison of Brookline. It seems someone has been using her deceased mother's social security number to open credit accounts. The address listed on those accounts? Your home, Samantha. David stood up abruptly, his face flushed. That's impossible. You're trying to destroy my marriage because you've never accepted— Sit down, David. The command in my voice was sharp enough to make him freeze. It was the same tone I'd used when he was 7 years old, and had been caught lying about breaking Mrs. Peterson's window with his baseball. And let me finish. Something in my expression must have convinced him, because he slowly sank back onto the sofa, his eyes never leaving his wife's face. The identity theft was just the beginning of what my investigator uncovered, I continued, pulling out more papers. There's also the matter of the insurance fraud, the mysterious fire at your summer cottage in Cape Cod last year that netted you quite a substantial payout. Funny thing about that fire, though, The accelerant residue patterns suggest it was deliberately set, and the insurance company is very interested in your husband's connection to the electrical contractor who declared the wiring faulty. Samantha shot to her feet, her composure finally cracking completely. You vindictive old witch! You can't prove any of this. Actually, I can. I remained seated, calm as still water. The contractor, Mr. James Mitchell, was quite cooperative once he understood the legal implications of insurance fraud. Amazing how quickly people become talkative when faced with federal charges. David's face had gone white as paper. Samantha, tell me she's lying. Tell me none of this is true. But Samantha was no longer looking at her husband. Her green eyes were fixed on me with pure hatred, the mask of sweetness finally stripped away to reveal the calculating predator beneath. What do you want? She hissed. Now we're getting somewhere. I closed the folder and set it aside. What I want, my dear daughter-in-law, is quite simple. I want my son back. I want to meet my grandchildren. I want the 17 years you stole from me. That's impossible, David whispered, but he was staring at his wife with dawning horror. The charity embezzlement. Samantha, please tell me you didn't. Oh, but there's more, I said softly. David, do you remember your friend Marcus Thompson from law school? The one who died in that car accident 3 years ago? Of course I remember Marcus. What does he have to do with anything? Marcus came to see me before he died. He was worried about you, about your marriage. He'd noticed some irregularities in your behavior, your finances. He suspected your wife was drugging you. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. David's head snapped toward Samantha, his eyes wide with disbelief. That's ridiculous, Samantha stammered, but she was backing toward the door. Marcus was drunk half the time. Everyone knew he had problems. Benzodiazepines, I said calmly. Small doses, administered regularly, not enough to cause obvious symptoms, but sufficient to cause memory problems, confusion, compliance. Marcus recognized the signs because his ex-wife had done the same thing to him during their divorce proceedings. David's hands were shaking now, the headaches, the memory gaps. You said it was stress from work. It was stress, Samantha said desperately. David, you can't believe this. She's trying to turn you against me because she's jealous. She's always been jealous that you chose me over her. But I wasn't finished. I reached into the folder one more time and pulled out the final document, the one that would change everything. There's one more thing, David, something I discovered just last week. I held up a medical report, my hands steady despite the gravity of what I was about to reveal. I have pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors give me 6 months. Perhaps 8 if I'm lucky. The silence that followed was deafening. David's face crumpled as if I'd physically struck him, and for a moment, I saw the little boy I'd raised, the son who'd once told me he'd take care of me when I got old. No, he whispered. No, that can't be true. You look fine. I look exactly as I've always looked, because I refuse to surrender to this disease without a fight. But the fact remains, I'm dying, David. And I refuse to die without knowing my grandchildren, without seeing my son one last time without her poison between us. Samantha was edging toward the door, her face a mask of panic, but David wasn't paying attention to her anymore. He was staring at me with tears streaming down his face. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you call? Because I knew she wouldn't let you come, just like she didn't let you come for your father's funeral 5 years ago. David's head whipped around to face his wife. You told me she didn't want us there. You said she specifically asked for privacy. I begged you to come, I said quietly. I called 17 times that day. Samantha answered every call and told me you were too busy with work to attend your own father's funeral. The expression on David's face was unlike anything I'd ever seen. A mixture of rage, betrayal, and devastating loss that cut straight through my heart. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. You kept me from my father's funeral? Samantha was pressed against the door now, her escape route blocked by Rosa, who had appeared silently in the doorway like a guardian angel. David, please, let me explain. Samantha started, but her husband was already standing, his tall frame trembling with fury. 17 years, he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. 17 years of telling me my mother didn't want to see me. 17 years of making me believe I was protecting our family from her interference. And all this time, I finished softly, you were protecting her from the consequences of her choices. David turned to face me fully, and for the first time in nearly 2 decades I saw my son clearly, not the puppet Samantha had created, but the man Charles and I had raised, the one with integrity and honor and love. Mom, he said, the word breaking on his lips. Oh God, Mom, what have I done? The word Mom hung in the air between us like a bridge spanning 17 years of pain. I watched my son's face crumble as the full weight of his wife's betrayal crashed down on him, and despite everything, despite the years of silence, the missed holidays, the grandchildren I'd never held, my heart broke for him. David, I said softly, rising from my chair with the grace I'd maintained even as cancer slowly consumed my body. You didn't know. How could you have known? But he was shaking his head, tears streaming down his face with an anguish that reminded me of the little boy who'd once cried in my arms after his first pet died. I should have known. I should have questioned it when you stopped calling, when you never tried to see us. That wasn't the mother who raised me. Samantha was still pressed against the door, but I could see her mind working frantically, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. Rosa remained in the doorway like a sentinel, her dark eyes filled with the protective fury of someone who'd watched me suffer in silence for too many years. David, please, Samantha tried one last time, her voice taking on the manipulative sweetness that had fooled him for so long. You can't believe her. She's sick, clearly confused. These accusations are absurd. Enough! David's voice cut through her words like a blade. When he turned to face his wife, I saw a transformation that took my breath away. Gone was the uncertain man who'd stood on my doorstep an hour ago, replaced by someone who looked remarkably like his father when Charles had been defending a client he believed in. I want to see the evidence, all of it. I handed him the folder, watching as he methodically examined each document with the practiced eye of a seasoned attorney. The insurance investigator's report on the Cape Cod fire, the financial records showing systematic theft from the children's charity, the credit reports bearing Eleanor Harrison's mother's name. Each page seemed to age him another year, but also to sharpen his focus. The drugs, he said without looking up from the papers. How long have you suspected? Marcus came to me 8 months before he died, I replied, settling back into my chair as a wave of fatigue threatened to overwhelm me. The cancer treatments had left me weaker than I cared to admit, but I'd hidden it well behind designer blazers and carefully applied makeup. He was convinced someone was tampering with your food or drinks. He'd done research after his own experience and noticed the signs, the memory lapses, the unusual compliance with demands you would normally have questioned, the way you seemed to lose your edge in court for a while there. David's head snapped up. The Kellerman case. I lost the Kellerman case because I couldn't remember key details of the testimony. I thought I was having a breakdown. You weren't having a breakdown, sweetheart. You were being systematically poisoned by the woman who claimed to love you. Samantha let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. This is insane. You're all insane. David, we've been married for 18 years. We have 2 children together. Are you really going to throw all of that away because your bitter old mother has convinced herself I'm some kind of criminal mastermind? 2 children I've never met, I said quietly, the words carrying more pain than any scream could have conveyed. Emma and James, 15 and 13 years old. Emma plays violin and wants to be a veterinarian. James is on the debate team and loves astronomy. I know this because I've been watching them from a distance for years, attending their school concerts and science fairs like a stranger, sitting in the back row so they wouldn't see the grandmother they've been taught to fear. David's face went white. You've been watching them? Every recital, every game, every achievement I could find out about. I have a whole album of photographs I took with a telephoto lens because it was the only way I could be part of their lives. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small photo album, its pages worn from constant handling. Would you like to see what your children look like when they smile? Because I can tell you, they have your father's eyes and your stubborn chin. David took the album with trembling hands, and I watched his face transform as he flipped through pages of candid shots. Emma accepting a ribbon at a science fair, James scoring a goal at soccer, both children laughing with friends at a school carnival. When he looked up, his eyes were filled with a grief so profound it took my breath away. You've been there. All this time, you've been there. I couldn't stay away completely. They're my grandchildren, David. The only family I have left besides you. Samantha was backing toward the window now, her designer heels clicking frantically on the marble floor. David, don't listen to her. She's trying to manipulate you with guilt. This is exactly the kind of emotional blackmail I've been protecting you from all these years. But David wasn't looking at his wife anymore. He was staring at a photograph of Emma playing violin at her middle school concert, and I could see the exact moment when the last of Samantha's hold over him finally shattered. Protecting me? His voice was dangerously quiet. Is that what you call keeping me from my dying father? Protecting me from my mother's cancer diagnosis? Protecting me from knowing my own children are growing up without their grandfather's stories and their grandmother's love? Your mother is toxic, David. Samantha's mask was completely gone now, revealing the desperate cornered predator beneath. She would have poisoned them against me, filled their heads with lies. The only poison in this family, David said, standing slowly and deliberately, has been you. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized weeks ago. When the voice answered, I spoke clearly and calmly. Detective Morrison? This is Margaret Whitmore. Yes, she's here now. I believe it's time. Within 20 minutes, my sitting room had been transformed into something resembling a crime scene. Detective Morrison, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who'd been building a case against Samantha for months, entered with 2 uniformed officers and a federal agent who'd been investigating the charity embezzlement. Mrs. Samantha Whitmore, Detective Morrison said, her voice official and unyielding. You're under arrest for embezzlement, insurance fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud. You have the right to remain silent. As the handcuffs clicked around Samantha's wrists, she turned to David with one final, desperate appeal. David, please, think about our children. Think about what this will do to them. I'm their mother. David looked at his wife, really looked at her, for what I realized might be the first time in years. When he spoke, his voice was steady and resolved. A mother protects her children. A mother doesn't steal from charities that help other children. A mother doesn't drug her husband or keep him from his dying parents. You're not a mother, Samantha. You're a criminal who happened to give birth. As they led her away, Samantha's composure finally cracked completely. You'll regret this, David. Both of you. When I get out, I'll make sure you never see those children again. I'll tell them their father chose a bitter old woman over their mother. Actually, Detective Morrison said, pausing at the door, given the severity of the charges and the federal involvement, you're looking at 15 to 20 years minimum. I don't think you'll be in a position to make threats for quite some time. The door closed behind them, leaving David and me alone in the sudden, profound silence. He sank back onto the sofa, his head in his hands, and for several minutes neither of us spoke. Rosa appeared with fresh tea and quietly withdrew, understanding that some moments require solitude. 17 years, David finally whispered. God, Mom, 17 years of my life, of their lives. How do I even begin to make this right? I moved to sit beside him on the sofa, close enough to touch but not quite daring to cross that final bridge. We start with the truth. We tell Emma and James who their grandmother is and why I've been absent from their lives. We let them decide if they want to meet me. They'll want to meet you, he said with more certainty than I'd heard in his voice since he'd arrived. They've been asking about you for years. I kept telling them you were too busy, that you lived far away, that you weren't interested in being a grandmother. I thought I was protecting them from rejection. The irony of it cut deep. Both of us had been protecting each other from imagined rejection, while Samantha orchestrated our separation like a conductor leading a symphony of destruction. There's something else, I said, reaching for his hand for the first time in nearly 2 decades. His fingers were warm and familiar, still bearing the small scar on his knuckle from when he'd fallen off his bike at age 8. The house. My will. Everything I own. I've left it all to you and the children. But I don't want to wait until I'm gone to see you enjoy it. David's grip on my hand tightened. Don't talk about dying, please. I just got you back. I'm not going anywhere just yet, I assured him, though we both knew the timeline cancer had given us. But I want to host that Christmas party Samantha mentioned. A real one. A family party where Emma can play violin and James can explain the constellations to anyone who'll listen. I want to meet my grandchildren properly, not from the back row of an auditorium. For the first time since he'd arrived, David smiled. A real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. They're going to love you, Emma especially. She has your stubbornness and your sense of justice. Last month, she organized a protest at school because they were serving lunch on styrofoam trays instead of recyclable ones. And James? James is like Dad, gentle and thoughtful, but incredibly smart. He's been building a telescope in the garage, trying to see Saturn's rings. He keeps a journal of everything he observes. David paused, his smile faltering slightly. They're good kids, Mom. Despite everything, despite her, they're genuinely good kids. Because they're your children, I said simply, and you're a good man who raised them with love, even when you were being manipulated. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of us processing the seismic shift that had occurred in the space of a few hours. Outside, the December afternoon was growing darker, but inside my sitting room felt brighter than it had in years. I need to call them, David said eventually. They're at school, but they'll be home soon. They need to hear this from me before they see it on the news, or hear it from friends. What will you tell them about Samantha? David was quiet for a long moment, considering the truth, in age-appropriate terms, that their mother made some very serious mistakes and will have to face the consequences, that it doesn't change how much she loves them, but it does mean our family structure is going to change significantly. And about me? That their grandmother has been waiting 17 years to meet them properly, and that I was the fool who kept us apart. He turned to face me fully, his brown eyes, so like his father's, filled with regret and hope in equal measure. Mom, I know I can't undo the years we lost. I can't give you back Dad's funeral or the Christmases we should have shared or the first steps in lost teeth and school plays you missed. But if you'll let me, I'd like to spend whatever time we have left building new memories. I felt tears on my cheeks for the first time in months, not tears of sorrow, but of overwhelming relief and joy. I'd like that very much. David pulled out his phone and dialed a number, putting it on speaker so I could hear. After 3 rings, a young voice answered, clear and sweet and completely unfamiliar. Hi, Dad. How was your meeting? Hi, sweetheart. Is your brother there too? James, Dad's on the phone. I heard footsteps and muffled conversation, then a slightly deeper voice. Hey, Dad. Emma said you were meeting with some clients about a case. David looked at me, asking permission with his eyes. I nodded, my heart hammering against my ribs. Actually, kids, I need to tell you something important, something that's going to change our family in a very good way. He took a deep breath. I'm here with someone I'd very much like you to meet. Your grandmother, my mother, Margaret Whitmore. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then Emma's voice, cautious but curious. Our grandmother? But Mom said she didn't want to know us. Your mother was wrong about a lot of things, sweetheart. Your grandmother has been wanting to meet you both for your entire lives. In fact, she's been to every one of your concerts, Emma, and every one of your debate tournaments, James. She's been watching you grow up from a distance because she thought you didn't want to know her. She was at my concerts? Emma's voice was full of wonder. Which ones? I leaned toward the phone, my voice shaking slightly. All of them, dear heart. You were magnificent in the spring recital when you played Bach. And James, your argument about space exploration funding at the regional competition was brilliant. You reminded me so much of your grandfather. Another silence, then James's voice, quieter, but filled with something that sounded like hope. Would you like to meet us? I mean, really meet us, not just watch from far away? I would like that more than anything in the world. Can you come for dinner? Emma asked, her excitement growing. I could play violin for you, and James could show you his telescope. David and I looked at each other, both of us smiling through tears. Actually, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word, I was hoping you might come here for Christmas. I have a very large house with lots of rooms and a piano that needs playing and a kitchen that hasn't seen a proper family dinner in far too long. What would you say to spending Christmas with your grandmother? The squeals of excitement from both children were answer enough. As we made plans for them to come stay with me for the remaining 2 weeks of their winter break, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 17 years. The joy of being needed and wanted by my family, not for my money or my house or my social connections, but simply for being their grandmother. Later that evening, after David had gone home to pack the children's bags and explain the more difficult aspects of the day's revelations, I sat in my garden room looking out at the lights of Boston Harbor. Rosa brought me tea and sat with me in comfortable silence, both of us savoring the victory we'd achieved. "Senora," she finally said, "Mr. Charles would be so proud of what you did today." I thought of my husband, of the man who'd loved our son unconditionally and who'd died believing David had chosen to exclude him from his life. I think he knew, somehow. I think he understood that love doesn't end just because someone tells you it should. 3 days later, I stood at my front door watching a taxi pull up to my circular drive. David got out first, followed by 2 teenagers who looked around at my mansion with wide eyes and nervous excitement. Emma was tall and graceful like her father, with long dark hair and intelligent brown eyes. James was shorter but stocky, with a serious expression that softened when he smiled. When they reached my front steps, I didn't wait for formal introductions. I opened my arms, and after a moment's hesitation, both children stepped into them. For the first time in 17 years, I held my grandchildren, breathing in the scent of their hair and feeling their warm, solid reality against my chest. "Welcome home," I whispered, and meant it with every fiber of my being. The Christmas we celebrated that year was everything I'd dreamed of and more. Emma played violin in my music room while James set up his telescope on the roof terrace to show me Saturn's rings. We decorated the tree together, cooked traditional family recipes, and told stories about their grandfather that made them laugh and cry in equal measure. On Christmas morning, as I watched my grandchildren tear through presents with the enthusiasm of teenagers finally free to love their grandmother without permission, I felt a peace I hadn't known was possible. The cancer was still there, still counting down my remaining days, but for the first time in years, those days felt precious rather than merely numbered. "Grandma," Emma said, looking up from the professional violin case I'd given her, "will you teach me to play the song Grandpa used to love? Dad said you used to play piano together." "The way you look tonight," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Of course, sweetheart. We have all the time in the world." And sitting there in my living room, surrounded by the family I'd thought was lost forever, I realized that sometimes the greatest victories come not from what we gain, but from what we refuse to lose. I had my son back. I had grandchildren who would know my love and carry my stories forward. I had Christmas mornings and violin lessons and telescope observations and all the ordinary magic that makes a family complete. Samantha could take her hatred to prison with her. I had everything I'd ever truly wanted, and no one, not disease, not time, not the woman who'd tried to destroy us, could take that away from me now. The old Margaret Whitmore, the victim who'd spent 17 years wondering what she'd done wrong, was gone. In her place stood a grandmother, a matriarch, a woman who'd fought for her family and won. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.
Did you enjoy my story? What a journey it has been. I truly wonder, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have chosen silence to keep the peace, or would you have done what I did to reclaim your dignity? Let's meet in the comments below. I'm so curious to hear your thoughts. I'm reading every single one. Which city are you listening from tonight? If my story resonated with you, you can support me and help me bring more stories like this to the world by sending a super thanks. Your sweet support means the world to me and allows me to continue this journey with all of you. On the screen now, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend you watch next. There are so many more on my channel, each with its own lessons and triumphs. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss a new chapter. Thank you for being here with me. Until the next story, with love and respect.